class is a standing balancing practice. We're going to be standing up and working on our ankles, our hip, and our knee mobility so that we can balance better. Starting in mountain pose, have the feet about hips distance apart. More importantly than how far apart your feet are, check in with your posture. So check in that the pelvis isn't tipping forward or back. Make sure the shoulders aren't rounding forward. Really make sure the shoulders stack right over the pelvis. And then as you stand tall, imagine you had a broom behind your back, or you can even try standing up against a wall and just see if you can get that triple S, the back of your skull, your shoulder blades, and your sacrum to touch the wall or a broom. We're going to start warming up our ankles by pressing into the toes, especially the big toes, and lifting up the heels. So as you lift the heels, really press into your big toes and then lower down. Lift your heels. Lower down, keep pressing into the big toes, lift your heels. Lower down, keep that upright posture, lift your heels. Lower down, think about that broom behind your back, lift your heels. Lower down, lift your heels, press into the big toes, lower down, one more, press into the big toes, lift the heels. Lower down. Now our heels are going to stay down. You can have a soft bend in your knees if that feels better. And again, really check that the pelvic bowl is upright. So we're lifting our pubic bone, the front of the pelvis, up toward the belly, keeping the shoulders over the pelvis. Press into your heels. Try to lift your right toes, pressing into the right heel, lower down. Now we're picking up the left toes, lower down. As you alternate, notice if anything is trying to move, especially the hips or the pelvis. So you really want to focus on holding everything in our posture still and just lifting the toes. So we're working on that ankle dorsiflexion when we pull the toes up toward the shin. Good, lower down. We'll start to warm up the hips now by doing some hip hinging. Now when we do this hip hinge, we're doing something called triple flexion. So I'll show you what it looks like. We're going to hinge at the hips, which means our hips move back, our knees are right over the ankles. So in this position, our ankles are flexed. They're in that dorsiflexed position. The knees are flexed and the hips are flexed. And then we'll come back up. So we're going to practice that. Anytime we hinge at the hips, we want to make sure that we're not just bending the knees. So the movement doesn't come from bending the knees. The movement comes from your hips moving back. So hips will move back so the torso gets toward the thigh while we bend the knees. But the knees aren't going forward. So knees are going to stay over the ankle. We're going to start with the hands right at the front of the legs. And as you hinge, keep that feeling of the broom behind your back. So move really slowly. And notice as you start to hinge, the glutes kick on. So if they don't, squeeze your glutes. Start to slide the hands down the legs. If you can get them to the knees, stop at the knees. Check that the knees are right over the ankles, not further than the toes. And then really squeeze your glutes. Slowly come back up with that long spine. So I don't want you to think of rounding anything. We're keeping that feeling of the broom behind the back, and the hips move. So the hips hinge, but everything else stays really long. Use your glutes. Come back up. So this triple flexion and this hip hinge is so important for just day-to-day functional movement. But it will also help us balance more, because when we work on this triple flexion at the ankles, knees, and hips, they all work together so that we can stand on one leg. So if we needed to reach something and balance on one leg, we need the ankle, the knee, and the hip to be able to flex properly. So now we're getting a 3-for-1 and working all those different things as we hinge at the hips. Using your glutes, they might be getting tired. Spine is long. Good, one more. We're going to work on our hip flexion now, which is the ability to move the hip and bring the torso toward the thigh or thigh to the torso. So as we do this hip flexion, we're working the hips, but we're also working the glutes, the core to stabilize the pelvis, and of course our balancing ability. So we're going to start with the right foot. Flex that right hip, reach your left arm up, squeeze that left glute, and then see if you can lift your left shoulder blade up even higher. Draw those pelvic points in, lower down. Pick up your left foot, flexing at the left hip. So that right glute is squeezing to hold that right femur in place. Right arm reaches up. See if you can reach that right shoulder blade up even more. Step it down. Keep alternating. Flex the right hip, lift the left arm, squeeze the left glute, really lift that left side. Lower down, flex the left hip, right arm reaches up, right glute squeezes, lift that right scapula. Back down, keep alternating. So as you alternate with this hip flexion, the goal is to not feel the movement anywhere but the hip and the arm that are moving. So we don't want to lose that posture of standing up nice and tall with that triple S stacked. Keeping that neutral pelvis so it doesn't tip forward or back. So make sure the low back isn't moving. Good, one more. Lower it down. Bring your hands to the sides of your pelvis. We're gonna tap this right foot out to the side. So just the toes are gonna tap down, but make sure your right hip hasn't lifted up. So we're keeping that neutral pelvis, lifting the pubic bone up toward the belly and imagining that those two pelvic points could draw in. So right now we're working the outer right hip and the right hip is in abduction. So it's moving away from the body. We're gonna lift it and bring that right knee in. So we're flexing that right hip with a little bit of internal rotation of the hip. So that right glute, right outer hip is really working. And then tap it back out to the side, but hold the pelvis still. So make sure it doesn't move. Good, pick it up. So we're flexing it, lifting the hip without moving the pelvis. Tap it back out. We're using both glutes, so that left glute has to work right now to stabilize the left hip so it doesn't wiggle. So both the glutes are helping to hold the pelvis neutral so that we can work this right hip coming from that abduction away from the body, back toward the body. And we're trying to stay really stable on that left foot, left ankle. Good. Step that right foot back to meet the left. If you need to shake the feet out, you can, and we'll switch. Left toes tap out to the side. Now right away, make sure the pelvis isn't uneven. Draw those pelvic points in, lift the pubic bone to the belly. Right away, squeeze both glutes. Good. Bring that left knee up. So we're flexing the hip, bringing that left thigh to the torso with a little bit of that internal rotation, and then tap it out to the side. Left hip abducts. Good, bring it back up. Tap it down. Do this at any pace you want, but remember to use both glutes. So our right glute now is working to stabilize that right hip and to help hold that pelvic bowl upright so it doesn't tip. And our left outer hip and glute are working so that the left hip can abduct and then come back up into flexion. And we're working on staying stable in that right foot, right side of the body. Good. Bring the feet back together. Shake it out if that feels good. Let's release the hips and the glutes a little bit by making some hip circles. So we'll pick up the right foot and just start to circle the hip. Try not to move the whole pelvis so the pelvis stays still. And we'll just try to circle that right hip in both directions. Release it down and switch. Pick up that left foot. Circle the left hip without the pelvis moving. Release it down. We're going to continue with our balance. So again, stand however it feels good with the feet far apart, checking that the head is right over the shoulders on top of the pelvis. We're going to tap our right toes forward and then tap your right toes out to the side, holding the pelvis in place, so don't let it wiggle. Tap your right toes behind you any amount without the pelvis tipping forward. Good. Tap to the front. Tap to your right side. Tap behind you without the posture changing. Good. Tap it right next to the left. Now you can stick with that. You can make it a little bit more challenging by adding a bend for that standing knee. So this time the left knee is going to bend over the ankle because we're working on that ankle dorsiflexion for the left side. So again, you can do the same taps, keeping that left leg straight, or bend the left knee as you tap the right foot forward. Tap to the side and notice where that left knee goes. Does it start to roll into the big toe? Does it roll out to the pinky toe? Good. Tap together, tap behind you. One more time, tap in front. You can bend the knee or keep it straight. Tap to the side. tap to the back, tap together, step it down. Switch sides. We're going to start with the standing leg straight. So we're going to tap the left toes forward, squeeze that right glute, tap to the side, tap behind you without the pelvis tipping, so lift that pubic bone up. One more like that, tap in front, hold strong in that right glute, tap to the side, tap behind you, tap together. Now maybe add that bend of the right knee, tap forward. So now we're really working on that ankle stability for the right side. Tap it behind you, tap it together one more time, tap it forward, maybe bend the knee, tap it out to the side, tap it to the back, together, step it down. If it feels good, roll the ankles in both directions, both feet. We're gonna work on our balance and weight changing. So you're gonna start in your mountain pose, checking that feeling of the broom behind your back. So notice if anything feels like it's out of that triple S stacked alignment. And we're gonna come into a chair pose or a hip hinge. So just like we did in the beginning, we're gonna hinge at the hips. So our hips are gonna move back, the knees bend, but they're gonna stay right over the ankles. Think about that broom here, so make sure we're not tipping the pelvis forward, arching the back. We want that long, low back, lifting the pubic bone to the belly. Now we're gonna keep this hinge in the hips, so you can bring your hands to your thighs for a little bit more awareness. Think about your left hip staying exactly as it is. So that left hip is flexed or it's hinging. Left glute is really strong. We're gonna lift the right heel up. Now notice if anything changed. Hold that position and start to slide your right toes back. So we're really balancing on this left leg. Tap it back. It might be right next to you. It might be further back. Keep that long spine. So we're really working that left glute. And then come back to that chair pose or hip hinge. Check the pelvis. Keep everything in place as you lift the left heel. So now we're loading or working that right side really hard. And any amount, tap that left foot behind you. It might be a couple inches. It might be pretty far back. But keep that right hip in that flexed position. Good, step it back a few more times. So we want to hold everything still in the spine. Lift the right heel, slide it back any amount. Keep that left hip hinging. Back to that hip hinge. Right hip stays how it is. Left toes tap back any amount. One more time each side. Lift the right heel, slide it back. Keep the glutes active. Back to that hip hinge. Lift the left heel. Slide it back. Lift your pubic bone to your belly button. Back to that hip hinge. Use your glutes to get back up. Continuing the theme of balance and weight shifting, we're going to start in our nice mountain pose posture. Keep your left foot pretty much where it is, and we're going to step the right foot back. Turn to the side, so open the hips. Bend for a goddess squat without tipping the pelvis. Straighten. Step your right foot back to meet the left. Check that posture. Keep the right foot mostly where it is. Left foot steps back. Open the hips any amount. Bend for a goddess squat. Come back to the top of your mat. So you're just going to switch, alternating stepping the right foot back, stepping back to the front of the mat, and stepping your left foot back. So we're just alternating. What we're working on is shifting our weight between right foot and left foot, and we're also working on our pelvis going from this closed position or neutral position to opening the pelvis to the side. So we're really working on how many things have to move or stay stable when we balance in all the different ways we balance. So not everything is the same as holding a tree pose or a warrior three. Sometimes we need to work on our balance as we move. Sometimes our hips are in two different positions. Our pelvis could be in a different position. Try one more. Step the feet back together. Let's try a static balance now. So we'll head into a tree pose. Check that pelvic bowl. Make sure it's not tipping forward or back. Shoulders over the pelvis. We'll flex our right hip. So pick up that right foot so your hip is in that flexed position. Left glute is squeezing. We're going to externally rotate this right hip to whatever degree feels good right there in that right hip or groin area, and we'll plant it for tree. So the toes can stay on the ground, They can come up onto this left leg, but really make sure that this left glute is squeezing and we're keeping the pubic bone lifting up toward the belly. Hands can come anywhere. You can take something a little bit more traditional with your arms. You can bring your hands somewhere on your body, wherever you need a little bit of extra feedback or awareness. Maybe it's the pelvis, maybe it's near the ribs, the glute, whatever feels helpful. Now just think about all those balance elements we've worked on, that core strength, glute strength, hip stability, ankle stability, and really just bring it all in. Think about everything that's working together to help you stay in this position right now. Release it down. Shake that left foot out a little bit and we'll switch. Check in with your posture. Flex that left hip right away. Squeeze that right glute to stabilize that right hip. Externally rotate the left hip to whatever degree feels good in the hip or groin. Plant the left foot down. Now check the pelvis. Check that feeling of the broom behind your back. Hands can come anywhere for your balance. As always, get your hands on your body. Get a little bit of that tactile feedback. Anywhere you need a little bit of extra awareness. So just start to notice what things feel a little bit more challenging, what muscles feel a little bit slower to fire. If it's your glute, keep your hand there or tap it. Tapping is a great way to kind of wake up the muscles we want to use. Release it down, shake out that right foot a little bit, and we'll stretch it out and balance with some side lunges. So we'll take the feet as far apart as you'd like, toes parallel, so our toes are pointing forward. Let's bend into the right knee. Now, just like we've practiced, we don't want that right knee to drive forward over the toes. We want our torso to come toward the thigh by our right hip moving back, back, back to whatever degree you get a stretch or pull on the inside of that left leg. Now again, think about lifting your pubic bone to your belly, drawing those pelvic points in. So this might even feel challenging to balance. If you're in this really hinged position, that's a lot of flexion for that right hip. And if we're not used to that, it feels tricky to balance. It might feel like we're gonna fall backwards. So we really have to get used to being in this position, flexing that right hip with the ability to press into that right heel and toes. Come back up and we'll switch. Bend into the left knee. So as we hinge, we don't want the knee to go forward. We want this left hip to move back, 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 so that my torso starts to come toward my left thigh. But make sure we're not arching the back here. That would be tipping the pelvis. We want to lift the pubic bone to the belly button. Try not to drop the head or round the shoulders. Think about keeping that broom behind your back. Good. Pressing into the feet. Keep moving that left hip crease back. Come back up. Roll or shake everything out a little bit. Good. The last way we're going to challenge our balance is just to stand here and close our eyes. Hands can rest somewhere on your body. You can bring a hand to your heart or a hand to your belly. And just close your eyes here. Notice if that even feels a little bit challenging. Notice your heartbeat. Notice your breath. Take a moment to thank your mind and your body for your practice today. Thank you for practicing with me.